How's it going today, YouTubers? So, I've been wanting to make this video for a while. I think I've probably recorded it like 5 times, but just not to my satisfaction. And again, I'd love to spend a ton of time going through and getting you guys charts and graphs and clips of, quotes and information from various sources, but just really unable to do a whole lot of video editing right now. But still want to make sure that you guys get the best videos possible out of me, and wanted to gather some more information regarding the chip wars, the core wars that have been kicked off here recently with the release of the AM4 platform and the Ryzen CPUs from AMD. Obviously, for a long time, Intel has been kind of ticking and talking and stringing us along with quad-core 8-thread parts for the mainstream has been the max that we've seen for years and years. And of course, they've given us small gains in efficiency and small gains in IPC here and there. But we have gone through numerous chipsets, numerous sockets, as Intel has been known to do. And the really only space that Intel has really accommodated consumers that want higher core and thread count parts is not in their mainstream product lineup. It's in their high-end desktop HEDT enthusiast workstation type of environment, which has been their X99 platform. And right now they still have their Broadwell E-chips, which Ryzen really has rendered completely useless at this point. The 6800 is their 6-core 12-thread part. It's a $500 CPU, and they have a 10-core 6950X, I believe it is, 20-thread CPU is like almost $2,000. But even an 8-core Intel part right now, the 6900K is over $1,000. I think it's got $1,050. And of course, you can get your hands on an unlocked, Ryzen R7 1700 for $320 with a cooler. And that's going core for core, thread for thread, with Intel. And of course, this is just the beginning of the core wars. And Intel is not going to stand still. They have moved up, several product releases in response to AMD, which is gaining market share back. I just saw something else recently where Intel has posted positive, non-negligible but substantial gains of the mainstream consumer CPU market since the release of Ryzen. And I definitely see that trend continuing right now. The value proposition that Ryzen offers and the AM4 socket offers, above and beyond what Intel is offering in their mainstream segment with socket 1151 and their chipsets. Let's go over that real quick, just to give you guys an idea of where things stand today at the beginning of these chip and core wars. You've got, like I say, obviously you have AMD's very new AM4 socket, which does support all Ryzen CPUs. All Ryzen CPUs are unlocked and can be overclocked out of the box. A lot of them do include coolers. And you have AM4's two kind of mainstream chipsets, being the B350 and the X370 chipsets. Both of those chipsets support 24 PCI Express 3.0 lanes. They support all the latest I/O, USB 3.1, M.2, NVMe, etc. So, and again, AMD has said it's going to support new chips going into that socket for the next 4 or 5 years. So you'll be able to put an AMD Zen-based, Vega-based APU in there if you want in the near future. You'll be able to put Zen Plus architecture chips in there, sometime in the future as well. For the next 4 or 5 years, it'll be a viable upgrade socket to have it in your system. Now, on the Intel side of things, you've got, socket 1151, and their kind of mainstream chipsets for socket 1151 really range from the H170 all the way up to the Z270 chipsets. The H270 being a 16 PCI Express 3.0 lane having chipset. It is not overclockable, regardless if you get an overclockable CPU, K-series CPU from Intel. That chipset will not allow you to overclock the CPU or the memory. Then you kind of have the quote-unquote last gen 1151 kind of higher end chipset, which was the Z170. It's a 20 PCIe Express 3.0 lane chipset. Does support overclocking of the memory as well as the CPU. Then you have the H270 chipset, which I believe again is 20 PCIe Express, PCIe 3.0 lanes, but does not allow for overclocking of the CPU or the memory. And of course you have the big dog, the Z270, which is the current kind of king of the hill in terms of the socket 1151 chipsets, which will of course allow you to overclock your CPU as long as it's a K-series, unlocked Intel CPU, as well as the memory on those motherboards. My recommendations for today in terms of value, in terms of what you should buy, I'm going to give you 2 price points and 2 recommendations. Now, first price point is like $200 to $250, and in that price point right now, I'm going to recommend that you go out and buy yourself the AMD Ryzen R5 1600. It's a 6-core, 12-thread part. You are getting 3 times as many threads that can be run simultaneously versus the Intel equivalently priced socket 1151 Kaby Lake part right now is the 7600K. It's only a quad core with only 4 threads. There's no hyperthreading on that chip, and socket 1151, the future is really unknown. We don't know whether future Intel chips such as Coffee Lake or Kaby Lake, that has greater than 4 cores or 8 threads, is even going to be available in that socket 1151. So if you buy a socket 1151 motherboard today, don't expect, I'd be very surprised if Intel didn't do their normal business model and try and get you to buy an entirely new motherboard and chipset, to upgrade those CPUs here in the very near future in the mainstream segment. So based on those 2 things, I'm going to recommend the R5 1600 6-core 12-thread part from AMD. $220, you save $30, you get a cooler, and you get a viable upgrade path with that AM4 socket for the next 4 or 5 years, where again on the Intel side, you may get a few more FPS and some low resolution gaming today, but there's a lot of room for optimization on the software side for the brand new Ryzen architecture from AMD. There's a lot of proliferation of more and more CPUs going out in the market with more cores and more threads. Game developers, software developers, operating system developers in general are going to start taking advantage of having those additional CPU resources, and they're going to start parallelizing workloads more and more and more as we move into the future. So really are future-proofing yourself by going with that R5 1600 over the 7600K today. And in the 300 to kind of 350 price range, I'm going to recommend the AMD Ryzen R1700, which is what I have in my current rig. Goes to 4 gigahertz, no problem on 1.4, 1.425 volts, something like that, and runs really well there all day long. It's an unlocked CPU, of course, and both the B350 chipset or the X370 chipset on that AM4 socket will allow you to overclock the CPU as well as the memory. So for $320 with a cooler and chipsets that you really can't go wrong with, both supporting as many PCI Express lanes as the very top end Z270 chipset for the socket 1151 motherboards from Intel. Probably going to save you some money on that front even, and again having a much more known and viable upgrade path for future APUs and CPUs. And then just today, Of course, you're getting twice as many CPU cores and twice as many threads as the equivalent priced, or at least roughly equivalently priced Intel counterpart, which is the 7700K Kaby Lake CPU. Of course, you are getting good clock speeds on that chip, but it certainly isn't going to magically grow any more cores or threads onto itself. And again, we really are left not knowing the viability of any kind of upgrade path whatsoever for that socket 1151 after that chip has kind of seen its day. And that day, believe me, for quad-core CPUs is coming very, very soon, where those CPUs are going to start being resource limited. They're going to be bumping their head on the ceiling in terms of what they can do, just because they're limited in the amount of things that they can process simultaneously. Whereas these Ryzen 12-thread and 16-thread CPUs really do have a lot of future-proofing room as developers of all kinds of software start to parallelize their workloads. And again, this Ryzen architecture, you guys have to understand, being completely brand new, has really been released into Intel's home core. They're playing every game right now, every application that these reviewers are testing and benchmarking. These are applications and games that have been, for a fact, they have been optimized year after year after year to be, to run the best that they possibly can on the chips that are in the market. And the chips that have been on the market for the past years have been Intel chips. So these are very, very heavily optimized for Intel's architectures specifically. We've seen a couple of developers, I think Warhammer, Ashes of the Singularity, both put out patches for AMD Ryzen and saw performance gains of like 30% with mere patches, not any kind of pre-planned or optimized code for the Ryzen architecture for their games, but just by way of some aftermath kind of patches, have seen huge performance gains with Ryzen. And these game developers now, these software developers now, they are seeing that AMD is going to gain. They are gaining market share. They're going to have a lot of these chips out there in the wild. Consumers that want to run their games, want to run their software, their operating systems, what have you. And they are going to be able to, and they are going to start to become more and more advantageous, learning the nuances of the Ryzen architecture and getting better and better performance in games and in all kinds of software in the future. And you're just not going to see those kind of gains on the Intel side because things, like I say, are already so highly optimized for those architectures. So, May 2017, that is where we currently stand in the mainstream kind of segment of the market. Again, if you want a higher core, higher thread count, CPUs from Intel, you kind of have to step up into their, ultra enthusiast, high-end desktop workstation, kind of chipset and CPUs, which are currently the Broadwell E chips. Again, you've got your 6, 8, and 10 core variants there on the X99 motherboards, which will soon be replaced. Intel has actually pushed up their schedule for the release of their new Skylake-x CPUs on the X299 chipsets, I believe. But I really think that those are going to be priced similarly. Those are some very high-end parts. Those motherboards go right now from like $200, maybe $150, up to like $600+ for an X99 motherboard. And you do get some additional PCI Express, lanes on those boards. But realistically, not a lot of consumers are going to be running more than 2 GPUs or 4, M.2 NVMe SSDs and RAID, something like that. So the mainstream market is really where I'm going to try and focus. But just to let you guys know, Intel will have 6, 8, 10, even 12 core Skylake-x parts on that higher end, high-end desktop platform here. I would say maybe June or July, but those I expect to be very, very expensive parts, and still kind of a niche market for people that need to do, again, 2, 3, 4 GPUs that need all those PCI Express lanes for huge rendering workloads or whatever it is that they're doing on those machines, but certainly not justifiable, value-wise or performance-wise for a mainstream consumer. So I really see AMD retaining the belt, the championship that they currently have in terms of the Core Wars. At the beginning of the Core Wars here, they have fired a massive shot across the bow of Intel, and it's yet to be seen, again, how will Intel react? Will they release, there's rumors of them releasing a 6-core, non-hyper-threaded, so just a 6-core, 6-thread Coffee Lake part that may or may not end up being compatible with socket 1151. And I believe that you are going to see a couple of just basically higher clocked Kaby Lake CPUs, but again, no more than 4 cores and 8 threads on those. That will be compatible, I believe, with socket 1151. But more than likely after that, they're going to change the socket, pull the carpet out from underneath you once again, and make you upgrade your entire platform moving forward. So, there's also rumor that AMD may try to release their own kind of high-end desktop socket and chipset, rumored to be the X390 and X399 chipsets with an as-of-yet unknown socket. But they certainly could do that. They do have their 32-core, 64-thread Naples server CPU that has 128 PCI Express 3.0 lanes. And they could certainly cut that in half. Just, cut the number of 4-core CCX modules in half and, cut it down to 4 and release a 16-core and 32-thread CPU variant. Or if some of those are, CPUs are bad in those CCXs, disable a couple of those and have a 14-core, 28-thread part. They could do a 12-core, 10-core parts, etc. And make that kind of their, product offering for that high-end desktop workstation kind of market. But that's yet to be seen if they'll do that. And if they do, I'm sure they're going to offer a lot more value just off the bat in terms of pricing, dollar amount per core, per thread relative to the Skylake-x parts from Intel. At least that's my assumption. And based on historic, history, it's what we've seen. So, in addition to that, again, you've got a lot of room for optimization on Ryzen as an architecture. You have a lot of viability in terms of an upgrade path. If they release a new socket for that high-end desktop market, just like AM4, I assume they're going to support that for a lot longer than Intel is going to support whatever socket those Skylake-x CPUs seat themselves into. If you just do a quick cursory check, maybe go on Newegg and shop by AMD or Intel, and you do a search by socket, you can just see a list a mile long of various sockets that Intel has released, in recent years, and AMD has really only released, AM3, AM3 Plus, AM4, and supported those chipsets for many, many, many more years, with a lot more CPUs, being able to fit into those chips, into those sockets rather, for a lot longer periods of time than Intel usually offers. So it's going to be interesting here, fellas. How do you guys feel about this? Is gaming today on games that have already been released and optimized for Intel your only concern? Do you think that gaming in the future will be perform better on Ryzen CPUs? As a lot of companies have said, they're going to be optimizing. I know that HEDT, being created by id Software and Bethesda, have already said that they are going to be optimizing for Ryzen, as well as Vega, which that's being be another video, but should run phenomenally on those new cards that have always done really well in Vulkan, which obviously is implemented, as an API. It's available in the HEDT engine. But aside from gaming, productivity workloads, just performance in general, I see that stuff getting better, over time, with more cores and more threads, and I see that being something that's going to hold you back if you buy an Intel part today that's only a quad core, only an 8-thread CPU, and even if they make a 6-core, 6-thread, Coffee Lake CPU compatible with socket 1151, I just don't see Intel being able to kind of take that title back from AMD in terms of who is winning the core wars in the mainstream market, at least not in 2017. Hopefully they rectify the situation in 2018, let a little bit of that air out of their heads, and start pricing things more competitively, because by that time we should have AMD's Zen Plus architecture arriving that will fit into the AM4 socket and offer even better efficiency and IPC gains over the current Ryzen CPUs, which again has a ton of room just through software optimization to perform better and better and better as time goes on. So that is my opinion as far as the state of the core wars today and where I see it going here in the second half of 2017. If you guys have any thoughts on this, if you think I'm wrong, if you think my opinion sucks, and you think that the 7700K is the best value, socket 1151 is going to have a lot more CPUs that are going to be able to fit into that socket, and I don't know what I'm talking about. You think AM4 is going to be stopped, being supported. AMD is going to pull one over on us and try and release a new socket for new CPUs moving forward here. Let me know down below, and if you think I'm right, let me know too. I love hearing I'm right. Everybody likes hearing they're right. So this is just kind of some best guesses, hypothesis for what I think is going to happen in terms of the core wars here, like I say, for the second half of this year. But certainly a great thing that AMD has started these core wars. If not for the release of Ryzen, I could just see Intel dragging us through the mud here for the next few years with the same tick and tock, little tiny gains in IPC and efficiency, and keeping the greater core and thread count CPUs for that super high-end market that's out of most consumers' reach. So I'm really happy that we have a viable alternative. I absolutely love the 8-core 16-thread part I've got back here running right now, Bionic and folding at home. So I'm helping out some greater causes with a lot of the CPU processing power that I have in this system now. And honestly, it runs in the background. I hardly even notice it. And I've got 8 cores, 8 threads rather, dedicated to doing, like biological, medical research, etc. And, I can get along with my computing needs just fine on the other 8 threads. And I can still game at, 4K or greater than that. I can still, do the internet, do video rendering, etc. And the system barely even notices it. It's like everything right now is a joke to this 16-thread CPU, and it's a phenomenal value. So I'm really glad the core wars have started. I hope you guys are stoked too. At the end of the day, it's great for all of us as consumers. If you if you're falling, head over heels for Team Blue, and you still want to go with Intel, socket 1151. And like I said, I wouldn't recommend it as a any kind of future optimization. I just don't see happening. It's pretty much maxed out in terms of optimization, and I really don't see a viable upgrade path there. But AM4, whether you go with a B350 chipset board or an X370 chipset board, or if you want to wait and hold out and see if AMD does release a new high-end desktop socket, based on the X390, X399 chipsets, you want some more PCI lanes for whatever reason, and you want to hold out for that, I think it's going to be a very viable platform for a very long time as well. So that's my 2 cents, guys. Hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, comments, other things you want to see me talk about on this channel, let me know down below. As always, I appreciate you guys. I hope you're doing phenomenal out there. Peace out. I'll see you in the next one.